Massive tech giants have the potential to alter the entire economies of this region. But how exactly are they going to do with this? And just as importantly, how will they work with governments to achieve these promising results? You're watching Inside AB. I'm Jeremy Lawrence, and I'm joined here in the studio by Bernd de Boosman. Bernd, you did the cover story with Microsoft in this week's edition, the Microsoft regional CEO. Tell us what he said about the plans they've got for this region.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Samer Abu-Ltaif said, which I thought was particularly interesting, was that Microsoft alone, if you take into account all its partners and its quote-unquote ecosystem, they think that they'll create 576,000 tech jobs between now and 2022. Wow. And if you use the which is now internationally accepted conversion rate, that for every tech job that's created, there'll be 4.3 ancillary jobs. That means that in the Middle East and North Africa, Microsoft alone has the potential to create 1 million jobs, and then another million if you take into account sub-Saharan African as well. So it's really quite significant in terms of job creation. And when you think of 2 million more people being employed, that's very, from a macroeconomic standpoint, that's quite very significant.
That moves the needle.
It does, very much.
But artificial intelligence, doesn't that pose a risk to jobs as well? Because that's the other side of the coin. A lot of their research is into these new technologies that could potentially lose jobs.
Of course, and that's not just Microsoft, of course. There's lots of different companies that are looking into that. And I think the natural reaction is for many people to think, oh, a robot is going to take my job, in not so many words. But that's not necessarily the case. It actually, if Microsoft and others have it right, it creates a new set of jobs. And stats show that as many as 55,000 jobs in the UAE by 2022 will be directly related to AI. And then when you look at it from a GDP standpoint, for example, in Saudi Arabia, 12.4% of Saudi GDP, which is $135.2 billion, will be generated by AI. Wow. In the UAE, that's 96 billion, and it's less in Egypt, but still quite significant, $42.7 billion by 2022 will be AI driven. Right. So I think that's not a realistic way of looking at it, is that jobs will be displaced. It's just a new set of jobs.
Yeah. Well, there's two different sides of the coin, isn't it? You see reports that it's going to take away jobs. You see other reports that it's going to kickstart entire economies and lead to lots more jobs. Which, by the way, to our viewers out there, if you've got any thoughts on that, please do let us know in the comments below. Are the robots going to steal your jobs? Anyway, Bernd, back to you and Microsoft. Let's dig into what he said about how companies like Microsoft can work with governments. And I know because I've interviewed the global head of Cisco, for example. We've interviewed Siemens, and we've had their global CEO on the cover. These are all companies that talk about working with governments to do all the necessary things in terms of legislation and laying out the frameworks to create these jobs that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's stick with AI as the example. So Microsoft is a very specific AI policy in which they're developing AI within certain ethical boundaries. But of course, they can't put that on the rest of society, on the rest of a national economy. That's a government's job, really. And it's, moving past that, it's also not the job of the company to prepare people for that sort of work. Yeah. So there's a lot of players that need to be involved in this. The government has to, establish a framework and regulations for what can be done with certain technologies, AI, for example. And also, what the government can do to prepare young people in whatever country, let's say the UAE or in Saudi Arabia, for that future. A lot of universities in this part of the world are state universities. They have to be looking forward to that eventuality that, these young people are going to grow up in a very different technological world than you or I, for example. Yeah. So there really needs. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to be in place for this benefit to reach everyone.
Yeah, it's a new paradigm, really, isn't it? When you've got these trillion-dollar companies, it can't be that the government just dictates to them. It has to be a two-way partnership, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's go back to Microsoft again. They talked about the winners and losers in this new era that we're entering. What did they say about that?
Well, they said that in any industrial revolution, there's always been winners and losers. For example, when factories were first created, a lot of people didn't benefit from that. So, the one thing that needs to be done is, at the moment there's kind of a disparity between different national economies in terms of where they are technologically. I mean, that's something that needs to be overcome. For example, I mean, Microsoft from Dubai, they also run sub-Saharan Africa. And the difference technologically between the GCC and, for example, somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa is quite significant.
Yeah.
So it's about inclusiveness. They have to kind of figure out how they're going to make sure that some countries and, you know, huge numbers of people aren't left behind when this happens, which is now. I mean, it's happening.
Yeah. Interesting point. Okay, well, thank you for that, Bernd. So that's Inside AB. Please do let us know your thoughts. As I said earlier, how do you think this is going to play out? Is it going to be for the benefit of all of us or not? And what sort of role do these tech giants have to play in that? Subscribe, comment, share. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. if it's a weekday. Bye.